Welcome to the Great Shrimp Shoal. Today we'll be dealing with a few maintenance issues, but as always, things are not as easy as they first seem. Along the way, we'll make some shocking discoveries, I think. Make sure to subscribe and enable notifications, and if you like what you see, make sure to vote with a thumbs up. The shrimp love when they get a few new fans. Nothing gets your heart moving like waking up to a scene such as this. What at first looked like a mist or clouds is actually a pretty significant algae bloom. The aquarium community is divided on how best to treat blooms like these. The debate comes primarily from the fact that the bloom can be caused by a number of different issues, each with their own solutions. It could be that there's too much nutrients or food floating in the water, there could be too much light, or the filter might just not be filtering enough. The garden's location might hold the key to whether or not this is related to something else entirely, though. You see, the garden's tank is very close to an exterior window, and this showers it with a good amount of indirect sunlight every day. Now, that sunlight provides a lot of energy for plants to grow, and that in turn can allow for an algae to bloom out of control. Those are not the only issues that can cause something like this, though. It can be related to the fact that this is a planted tank. There is always a push and pull, a balance, if you will, between the growing plants and the algae. For example, if the plants are not pulling enough nitrogen out of the water, the algae will. And where there is space to grow, fauna usually do. I'm going to try a couple of things to fix this, and I'll start with the least drastic first and work my way up. As I had mentioned before, the lantern has become a perfect hiding spot for both the ghost shrimp and the cherry shrimp. So, I've lost track of who's inside and who's outside. Sometimes they disappear between the grass, and sometimes they just disappear to the lantern, and I don't know who is where. That has made finding the pregnant female that much harder. Because this is a planted tank, and there are plants literally growing everywhere, I've tried to keep the cleanings to a maximum of about once a week. And that makes it so that if anybody gets lost in the lantern and passes away, they can be waiting there for a week before I figure it out. It might not seem like it's a significant issue, but a dead shrimp laying in the grass is a lot more easy to spot and remove, thereby reducing the amount of ammonia in the water than a shrimp that's hiding tucked away in a corner of the lantern. Along with those discoveries, I've made a few others that are even more exciting and potentially worrisome at the same time. There are a few new members of the garden's community that were very unexpected. With the algae bloom, I spotted detritus worms, copepods, and what I believe to be planaria. All of these are in a 3-gallon tank which is not even filled to the top, so I've had to look for some place to expand to. You can see it here in the background, and I've been prepping it for the last couple of weeks, but I've purchased a 10-gallon tank to move the entire community of shrimp into and separate them from the neon tetra who may have been causing stress issues. During this time, the ghost shrimp has been doing really well. He's eating enough and getting around the tank, probably more so than any other shrimp, and his coloring is exceptional right now, which must mean that he's very happy. You can see what I've pointed out before here with the ghost shrimp's anatomy being different than the cherry shrimp. You see the chelipeds, the arms with the claws on them that he uses to grab food and do other things. They're long and have a bend in them that makes them appear much longer than that of the cherry shrimp. Apart from being longer, it also dictates that he uses them differently in order to grasp food and clean himself. The cherry shrimp seem to pick up food in a row in front of themselves while moving backwards or forwards. The ghost shrimp sweeps his arms from side to side and grabs food in a much larger space. You can see here that he's actually using some of his walking legs in order to clean his pleopeds. And then you can see that he again uses his chelipeds in order to clean both of his antennae. In order to complete the move to the new tank, I'm going to move some of the plants first, and I'll be very selective about what I move and how I plant them. And then I may end up moving in the lantern, but I'll leave that decision to the last minute. The move will do a number of things, but I think the thing I'm most excited for is the ability to get rid of the Hygrophila polysperma, at least in the amount that I currently have it in the garden. I think it's way too much, and if I do keep one or two plants, I think that will be the max. The neon tetra will remain in the garden, and I'll move the shrimp over and acclimate them, even though the water has mostly come from the garden. This is the last night that the cherry shrimp that I've had from the very beginning will spend in this tank. I hope that she's had a restful time. The ghost shrimp was the first to be moved in, and this tank is very different than the garden. There's a lot more surface area for them to roam around in, and the plants have all been planted in a very specific manner. The garden's greatest shortcoming was the fact that the Hygrophila polysperma were planted as a carpeting plant, and as such, their seeds were spread over the substrate. They literally dominated every single surface in the garden. I brought over 4 of those plants for this tank, and I made sure to clean them thoroughly because I have heard that they can rapidly multiply from just a cutting. I brought in 2 new species of plants, Utricellaria graminifolia and Rotala rotundifolia. After a while, I moved the cherry shrimp in, but here is what I found most interesting. You can actually see the colony of copepods against the black of this sponge filter. I didn't have a sponge filter in the garden, but I did transfer some of the water, and I did dip the sponges into the water of the garden's tank, so they evidently found the sponge to be a much more hospitable place to live. Copepods are a sort of crustacean, but as you can see, their size dwarfs them in comparison to the dwarf shrimp. All of the shrimp seem to be doing fine. Everybody's foraging and there's enough biofilm for them to feed, but I have added some of the food pellets in order to make sure that they're well fed. Upon closer inspection, it's pretty obvious that this cherry shrimp is in distress. I don't think it has anything to do with the copepods, and it's hard to tell if it's in pain or what it's suffering from. There are some obvious signs, starting with its coloration, and it looks a little bloated, which is similar to what happened to the other shrimp that had died in the garden. Do you see the separation between the head and the abdomen in the coloration? This could be a sign that the water nutrients are off and that there's too much calcium in the water column, thereby making the shell too hard for the shrimp to molt. It's really striking how much of an effect this has on the shrimp's demeanor. These are usually very active species, and to see them frozen like a solid piece of stone like this with very minor movements is quite shocking. The symptoms progress quite rapidly, and after a few minutes the shrimp is hanging unconscious off the side of the sponge filter with its chelipeds moving in erratic motions. Sicknesses brought on by water quality issues like this can crop up fairly quickly, but I believe that this has been an issue that's been brewing over time. I don't think that this affected the shrimp all of a sudden. Again, it's my ghost shrimp which has jumped up to the task and dutifully become a sort of cleanup crew by chowing down on the deceased shrimp. And while this is something that would happen in nature and I would normally let it go, I don't think that I'll let it go for very long in this case because I don't yet know what killed the cherry shrimp. Here you can see my main cherry shrimp is actually acclimating to the new tank really well and munching on a food pellet. And you can also see something that I had neglected to tell you. I have gone ahead and added 7 new jade cherry shrimp. Almost all of them are juveniles or younger, so they have a lot of growing to do, and hopefully they will find a good spot inside this new tank. I also have some new plants that I've added, including this dwarf hairgrass and this moss that I would love for to gain footing inside the new tank. Overall, there is now a good amount of filtration, new substrate, and a lot more water to help buffer water changes and any chemical changes and nutrients that might be affecting the water column. I think that this will make the new home for the shrimp a lot more stable. Thank you guys for showing up. That's it for this week's episode. Next time, we'll catch up with how these new jade cherry shrimp are acclimating to their new home.